Hello and welcome to this presentation which looks at assessment mitigation and the guidance available to you for VRQs, NVQs and other qualifications offered by City and Guilds. We are going through unprecedented times, and since lockdown began in March, we've been working alongside other awarding organisations, awarding bodies, sector stakeholders and regulators to develop approaches to support as many learners as possible achieve a result this summer. You'll probably have heard about mitigation, mostly through news of how GCSEs and A-levels, technicals, functional skills and other high volume qualifications will be treated, particularly given that learners this summer will not be able to take their assessments in the way they might have expected to or planned to. So in the following slides, we'll talk you through the approaches we have adopted for our qualifications and where you can find the guidance and support you need to help you through our processes. So let's take a look at the range of information available, how it's organised and where it's stored. We'll look again at some information in a bit more detail in slide 9. So firstly, we've established a dedicated area on our website where you can find communications, guidance, updates and links to key information, including those from our regulators. You will also find a list of our qualifications and the primary mitigation approach approved for each qualification. This could be one of 4 approaches: calculate, adapt, delay or no mitigation. And we'll cover these approaches in a bit more detail later on. Our sector-specific guides go through each of the qualifications in the sector and the mitigation approach that will be applied. We've also produced guidance on determining centre assessment grades for our suite of VRQs, and again these are located on our COVID-19 pages. We're also providing ongoing support from our industry and specialist technical advisors through a series of sector-specific webinars. So let's move on to some more detailed assessment guidance. We've worked with regulators, SQA in Scotland, Ofqual in England, QW in Wales and SEA in Northern Ireland to ensure the right mitigations and guidance are in place to ensure as many learners as possible due to take their assessments or qualifications in summer 2020 receive results, and so that they can progress onto the next steps in their education, employment and life. For each of our qualifications, we've had to consider the best approach to take to mitigation. There are 4 main approaches. The first is calculated results. So we've proposed calculated results for qualifications where their primary purpose is progression to either further or higher education. So learners will receive a calculated result for assessments they were due to complete this academic year. Also where there is sufficient evidence available to form a valid judgment and where there are no health and safety or safeguarding issues. Calculated results will draw appropriately on a range of trusted evidence and will be based primarily on tutor judgments of what result each learner would most likely have achieved had they sat their assessments this summer. These will then be subject to quality assurance by City and Guilds. And City and Guilds will also quality assure the judgments across different centres once they've been submitted. Where there are banked assessment results already achieved for learners, these will be used. Secondly, adaptation. We've proposed adaptation for qualifications where their primary purpose is a mix of either progression to further or higher education or signifying competence, or where their primary purpose is to signify competence. Also where a calculated result or centre assessment grade is not possible, and where learners are completing programmes of study where the primary aim is linked directly to occupational professional competence. Also where the validity of the assessment will remain protected, and where it is not in direct conflict with identified health and safety or safeguarding issues. The third approach is delay. So for some qualifications, assessment will need to be delayed when neither estimation nor adaptation is possible. This is very much based on the purpose and nature of the qualification. Qualifications such as licence to practice qualifications or those qualifications considered high risk will fall under this approach. And finally, no mitigation. This is where no action is required and centres can continue to deliver assessments or examinations as normal. So which learners or candidates are in scope for these mitigations? Ofqual has published its decisions following the consultation on the Extraordinary Regulatory Framework, which came into effect on Friday the 22nd of May. The aim is to provide sufficiently valid and reliable results to as many affected learners as possible. And the framework means we can award results to candidates in scope based on one of the 4 agreed mitigation approaches. The framework is a temporary one, ending on the 31st of July. So these mitigation approaches are only available to learners who meet the following criteria. Those who were incomplete or still registered at the 20th of March 2020. Those who were scheduled to complete their qualification or assessments by the 31st of July 2020. And those who have completed a learning programme that addresses a significant proportion of the content of their qualification. There will be some learners who are out of scope, so for those please continue to offer remote and blended learning wherever feasible. To help explain the mitigation approaches for our qualifications, we've organised these by sector. These documents aim to summarise each approach and then provide a list of which qualifications fall under which mitigation approach. You can click on the red link at the bottom of the slide to view the sector guidance documents. So let's look at some of the key dates for our vocational and technical qualifications this summer. So firstly, submission deadlines. For those qualifications following a calculated results approach to mitigation, provisional centre assessment grades must be submitted by 26th of June 2020. For those following an adaptation approach, claims must be submitted by the 30th of September 2020. So for results, for functional skills and essential skills, all approved results will be available on the 31st of July. For technicals at level 3, results will be available for centres and candidates on the 3rd of August. For technicals at level 2 and level 2 VRQs, results will be released but restricted to centres on the 19th of August. They will be released to candidates from the 20th of August. For using and applying mathematics, sometimes known as core maths, the extended project qualifications and level 3 VRQs, results will be available on the 13th of August. There's also a very useful summary of the confirmed arrangements on page 3 of the Centre Guide to Submitting Centre Assessment Grades. Now let's look in a bit more detail at the calculated grades approach, but first a little bit of terminology. So just to be clear, calculated grades are the confirmed grades that candidates will receive once confirmed by City and Guilds. Centre assessment grades, which we will also talk about, are the provisional grades that centres will submit to City and Guilds. The calculated grades approach is being used in a number of qualifications, such as functional skills, technicals, using and applying mathematics or core maths, the extended project qualifications, essential skills in both Wales and Northern Ireland, ESOL, and a range of other vocational and technical qualifications. These are being supported by more detailed guidance documents discrete to each qualification, and these describe the process in more depth. The Centre Guide to Submitting Centre Assessment Grades and Declaration Forms supports the submission process. And in addition, the sector-specific guidance documents list out the qualifications in the sector and the mitigation approaches to be applied. Some qualifications are also supported by detailed FAQs. Centre assessment grades are submitted through a tool located within the walled garden. The Centre Guide walks you through that process, and the usual walled garden permissions apply. Reminder that the deadline for submitting all centre assessment grades is the 26th of June 2020. For qualifications using the calculated grades approach, we ask you to follow a step-by-step approach. The first step is about establishing who is in scope or eligible for the process. Remember that it's those candidates who would have expected to take their assessment or exam from the 20th of March to the 31st of July, and whose opportunity to take their assessment or exam has been disrupted by the COVID-19 situation. Step 2 is a reminder that all those involved in the process may need to familiarise themselves or refresh their knowledge of the standards or subject criteria or content of the assessments they're making judgments against. In addition, the guidance they need to be familiar with to make sound assessment judgments. Step 3 is about gathering and reviewing valid or trusted evidence for each candidate and sometimes against a component or a qualification. And step 4 is the process of determining a centre assessment grade, so making the judgment, perhaps alone or with peers. Step 5 is about considering and conducting the relevant standardisation work to ensure the judgments and centre assessment grades being submitted are sound and consistent. And finally, step 6 covers the sign-off and centre declaration process. The submission process is clearly presented in the Centre Guide to Submitting Centre Assessment Grades, and this covers how to use the tool within the walled garden for this purpose. This tool will also have the functionality from the 12th of June to allow upload and download of larger submissions. The guide also covers the centre declaration process, so covering who is required to do this and what it needs to cover. Once complete, the declaration needs to be submitted to estimation.quality@cityandguilds.com, and this is a separate submission from the results submission on the walled garden. Now let's also take a look at the adaptation approach. Remember that we've proposed adaptation for qualifications where their primary purpose is a mix of either progression to further or higher education or signifying competence, or where their primary purpose is to signify competence. Where a calculated result or centre assessment grade is not possible, and where learners are completing programmes of study where the primary aim is linked directly to occupational or professional competence. Also where the validity of the assessment will remain protected, and where it does not conflict with identified health and safety or safeguarding issues. For adaptation, we're recommending a slightly different step-by-step approach, this time using 7 steps. Step 1 again asks you to identify learners in scope, but also to consider any specific qualification criteria. Step 2 is about undertaking an audit of each learner to identify completed units and agree an assessment plan for the outstanding units within permitted arrangements. Step 3. For assessments where an adaptation is permitted, ensure that the assessor reviews all evidence and follows standard assessment processes, ensuring decisions are recorded clearly. And for step 4, you need to clearly identify which units adaptation has been applied to. Where multiple options of assessment adaptation is available, you need to identify which method was taken. For step 5, complete the required declaration form, which must be subject to both internal and external quality assurance. And for step 6, internal quality assurance procedures should be followed to agree final results, and all associated records must be retained by the centre. For step 7, you need to submit unit claims via the walled garden by the 30th of September 2020. Centres intending to apply adaptations to assessment need to complete the Centre Intention to Apply Adaptations to Assessment form to confirm the following information: the centre name and number, the qualification names and numbers confirming where adapted assessments are being used, and this form must be signed by the head of centre or someone who has permission to act on their behalf. It then needs to be submitted to us by the 31st of July and needs to be sent to adaptation.quality@cityandguilds.com. Let's look at the submission and quality process for adaptation. There's an adaptation submission spreadsheet, and this must be completed and contain details for all learners where adaptation has been applied. This must be signed off by the head of centre or someone who has permission to sign on their behalf, and electronic signatures are acceptable. The spreadsheet must be completed and attached to the CA2 activity in Walled Garden once an activity has been arranged with your EQA. For centres with direct claim status or DCS, results can be claimed via the Walled Garden in the usual way. For centres on a medium or high risk status, a remote monitoring needs to take place before any results can be claimed. Results need to be claimed using the results override process, and more information on this process will follow. EQA activities will be arranged by the adaptation quality team as required. Just to note that all results for learners where adaptation has been applied must be made by the 30th of September. More information is available on the website, and the adaptation submission spreadsheet is available by clicking on the red link. For more information, we recommend that you attend one of our sector-specific webinars. These are hosted by our specialist technical advisors and will take you through the mitigation process in more detail. You can sign up using any of the red links here. And now let's look at the appeals process. There are two different processes, one for calculated results and another for the adapted assessments. So firstly, for calculated results. For summer 2020 assessments where results have been calculated, the following principles apply. So appeals can be made, but on the grounds that City and Guilds did not use the correct information or follow the correct procedures. It's not possible to appeal the professional judgments of tutors or centres. So there will be no inquiry about results process for calculated results. This is because City and Guilds has not marked or moderated any candidate work for these assessment components. So if a centre is unhappy with a result, they can go straight to the appeal stage of the process. For adapted assessments, please just follow the standard appeals process. An appeal cannot be made for what has been adapted, but an appeal can be made about the final result. These are extremely challenging times, and we are keen to support you as best we can. So on this slide we provide the details of those on hand to help and a reminder of the COVID-19 support pages where we hope you'll be able to find all the information you require. So finally, thank you very much for listening, and we hope you found the presentation helpful.